Step back in time and rediscover the eerie world of early amusement parks. These thrill grounds weren't always cheerful. They were often wild, dangerous, and bizarre. Let's explore the chilling past together. Imagine a roller coaster so intense it knocked people out cold. That was the Flip Flap Railway, one of Coney Island's earliest loop-the-loop rides. Built in 1895, this wooden nightmare had a vertical loop with such extreme G-forces that riders reported blurred vision, whiplash, and even unconsciousness. Unlike today's engineered loops, this one was pure guesswork, based more on daredevil dreams than physics. It was a sensation for thrill seekers and a horror story for safety experts. Spectators loved watching riders scream in terror, their necks snapping forward at the top of the loop. Eventually, the injuries piled up, and it was shut down by 1902. But it helped spark America's obsession with extreme rides, even as it terrified a generation. Safety harnesses? Smooth transitions? Not back then. Just brute force, wooden tracks, and blind faith. The flip-flap proved one thing. Early thrill rides didn't aim to be safe. They aimed to be unforgettable, for better or worse. Hellgate wasn't just a name. It was a fiery attraction that lived up to its terrifying reputation. Unveiled at Coney Island's Dreamland in 1904, this ride simulated a descent into the underworld. Guests boarded boats that drifted through chasms lit by red flames, smoke, and eerie wails. Animatronic devils and tortured souls leered from the shadows. It was meant to be thrilling and theatrical, a reflection of society's strange fascination with punishment and sin. But in 1911, a fire broke out, ironically, near Hellgate. The flames consumed the entire Dreamland Park overnight. Hellgate, with its real fire and flammable sets, turned into an inferno, injuring many and killing animals in the park's small zoo. After that, the public started questioning how far amusement should go. Still, Hellgate marked the beginning of dark rides, haunted attractions that scared and stunned for fun. Today's ghost trains owe their roots to this disturbing descent into the fiery unknown. It looked innocent enough, a giant spinning disc in the middle of a pavilion. But the human roulette wheel was chaos incarnate. Popular in early 20th century amusement parks, especially in Venice Beach and Luna Park, it flung participants outward like rag dolls. Guests, often women in skirts and heels, would sit on the disc, which spun faster and faster until centrifugal force sent them skidding across the floor. The game was to see who could stay on longest. There were no helmets, no padding, no rules, just screaming laughter, bruises, and flying shoes. Men stood nearby with poles to poke anyone trying to cheat by gripping the surface. It was part thrill, part spectacle, and completely unregulated. Hospitals often braced for a weekend rush of sprained wrists and dislocated shoulders. The human roulette wheel faded out as lawsuits and regulations crept in, but it remains a dizzy symbol of amusement's most lawless era. But the horror didn't end there. Wait until you hear what they did to simulate drowning. Before disaster movies, there was the Johnstown Flood Ride, an immersive attraction based on a real tragedy. Created in the early 1900s, this ride placed guests in rickety seats facing a painted set of the Pennsylvania Valley. Suddenly, thunder clapped, lights flickered. A wave of real water burst forward, crashing into the model town while people screamed in manufactured terror. The original 1889 flood killed over 2,200 people, yet this gruesome ride turned it into entertainment. Why? Because disaster fascinated early 20th century audiences. They weren't looking for fantasy, they wanted realism, even if it was morbid. The ride was massively popular for years, with different parks copying the format. Eventually, public opinion shifted. Using real disasters as playthings began to feel wrong. The ride was quietly retired. Still, it marks a time when the line between spectacle and tragedy was paper-thin, and terrifyingly easy to cross. Yes, this was real. The Los Angeles Alligator Farm once featured a stunt where children slid down a playground-style chute, directly over a pit full of live, snapping alligators. The reptiles swarmed beneath the slide as families watched and cheered. This was marketed as a daring photo opportunity and a rite of passage for brave kids. The alligators couldn't reach the slide, but the danger felt close enough to give parents heart palpitations and kids nightmares, or bragging rights. No one died, miraculously, though some injuries occurred when kids slipped or got too close afterward. Eventually, Animal rights concerns and mounting liability ended the act. Still, this was part of a strange tradition where parks used live animals to heighten thrills. It's a wonder any child made it out of the 20s without trauma. Which of these wild early attractions would you dare to try or never go near? Let us know in the comments. In the early 1900s, electricity was new, mysterious, and a little terrifying. Parks turned this public curiosity into shocking sideshow acts. Electric girls and shocking boys were human batteries, sitting on insulated chairs while currents passed through their bodies. Guests could touch their hands and feel the jolt. Some performers lit bulbs with their tongues. While most demonstrations were relatively safe, the current was low voltage. Some caused burns, pain, or heart palpitations, especially if the equipment was faulty. These bizarre spectacles weren't just science demos. They were billed as sensual or daring entertainment, especially the electric girl, often dressed in futuristic costumes. By the 1930s, as electricity became mainstream and safety standards improved, the novelty wore off. Still, the idea that people once paid to get mildly electrocuted or to electrocute someone else is a chilling reminder of how far amusement once went to thrill and disturb. Up next, a wooden ride that made riders pray for their lives with every splintering turn. Imagine a teeter-totter not for children, but for grown adults, powered by steam, rising 2 stories high and slamming down with bone-jarring force. That was the giant Seesaw, a short-lived yet wildly popular thrill machine in several early 20th century amusement parks. Passengers sat on either end of a massive mechanical plank, which was lifted by gears, clanked into the air, then released. The resulting drop sent riders flying a few feet into the air before being caught again by the machine's next movement. Safety restraints? None. Riders held on with bare hands while spectators watched for the inevitable spill. Accidents weren't uncommon. Broken noses, sprained backs, and the occasional concussion added to its legend. Eventually, liability concerns forced parks to dismantle these monstrous seesaws. But for a time, the giant Seesaw captured the brutal charm of early thrill-seeking. Part fun, part fear, all risk. It was the playground turned nightmare, because apparently, the higher the risk, the higher the ticket sales. What was advertised as flirtatious fun often turned into a vortex of bruises. The Barrel of Love, a rotating wooden cylinder, invited couples or strangers to walk through as it spun rapidly. The idea was playful physical contact and shared laughter, but in reality, it was chaos. As the barrel turned faster, people lost their footing, tumbled over one another, and slammed into hard wooden walls. Some patrons passed out from dizziness. Others left with black eyes or twisted ankles. Though not explicitly labeled dangerous at the time, these barrels became notorious for low-key injuries and questionable hygiene. Despite their slapstick appeal, the rough tumbles weren't always innocent. Women often complained of unwanted groping in the confusion. By the mid-century, the Barrel of Love was quietly removed from most parks. It lingers as a memory of when early amusement meant throwing caution and people into a spinning tube of mayhem, all in the name of fun. Don't let the name fool you. The Scenic Railway was anything but serene. One of the earliest forms of roller coasters, these rides combined high-speed thrills with elaborate scenery and tunnels. Riders sat in open-air wooden cars, often without seatbelts or lap bars, as the cars careened around sharp turns and steep drops. Some railways included firework effects, pitch-black tunnels, and sudden drops in the dark. In 1907, one Scenic Railway in New York City derailed, hurling passengers into nearby crowds. Another collapsed in Chicago, killing several riders. The technology wasn't there yet. Tracks warped in the heat, brakes failed, and ride operators relied on hand signals instead of control panels. But none of that slowed the public's appetite for danger. These early coasters gave riders genuine fear, because it wasn't all for show. The terror was real, and the consequences were permanent. But the most haunting attractions weren't rides at all. They were human exhibitions that today feel disturbingly hard to imagine. Yes, this existed, and it was both miraculous and deeply unsettling. At several early amusement parks, including Coney Island, a popular attraction was the infant incubator exhibit. Inside glass-walled rooms, premature babies were kept alive using early incubator technology, often because hospitals wouldn't yet accept them. The exhibit charged admission to view these tiny, struggling lives as curiosities. It was part sideshow, part legitimate neonatal care. Strangely enough, some of the first incubators were publicly funded through ticket sales. Dr. Martin Cooney, who ran the attraction, reportedly saved thousands of lives. But the ethical unease remains. Fragile babies put on display, their survival a form of entertainment. Visitors watched as nurses tended to the infants, often snapping photos or pressing their faces to the glass. It's one of the most bizarre and complex chapters in amusement park history, a mix of wonder, voyeurism, and desperation that helped shape modern neonatal medicine.
Which of these early horrors surprised you most or disturbed you the deepest? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're listening. Before safety standards, looping roller coasters were brutal experiments in physics. The infamous Loop the Loop at Atlantic City debuted in 1901, boasting a full vertical circle made from wood and metal. Riders boarded tiny single-passenger cars that shot down a steep drop and through a tight circular loop. Problem was, early designers didn't understand G-forces. The loop's shape snapped necks, blacked out passengers, and crushed vertebrae. The ride was so forceful, it could only be operated a few times per hour. Park owners limited ridership to avoid multiple hospital visits in one day. People still lined up, drawn by the danger as much as the thrill. But the lawsuits mounted, and by the 1910s, most looping coasters were dismantled. Today's smooth steel loops trace their lineage to these terrifying prototypes. The Loop stands as a monument to how far thrill designers were willing to go, and how close amusement often came to annihilation. You didn't ride it, you survived it. Long before immersive haunted houses, there was the House of Trouble, an interactive walk-through nightmare that mixed slapstick with psychological horror. Guests wandered through a dark, crooked building where floors shifted, staircases led nowhere, and walls moved without warning. Trick doors sent people sliding down hidden chutes or trapped them in pitch-black closets. It wasn't just about scares, it was disorientation by design. Inside, actors dressed as lunatics and mad doctors screamed nonsense or chased guests with props. One room included mechanical chairs that suddenly flipped visitors backward. Many left laughing, but some exited crying or visibly shaken. Claustrophobia, injury, and even panic attacks weren't uncommon. Still, the House of Trouble spread like wildfire across parks in the 1910s and 20s. Eventually, changing tastes and new fire safety laws ended its reign, but it helped lay the foundation for the modern haunted house, born not from horror films, but from real early 20th century terror designed for laughs and screams. Modeled after the catastrophic 1906 San Francisco earthquake, this ride was both thrilling and wildly insensitive. Guests sat in wooden bleachers as the entire platform began to shake violently. Walls cracked on purpose, fake rubble fell, and terrified screams blared from hidden speakers. Some versions even used gas jets to mimic fires and burst pipes. The ride was meant to simulate what it felt like to be in a collapsing city, and early audiences couldn't get enough. For many, it was their first exposure to large-scale disasters, and the simulated chaos triggered genuine fear. In an age before movies could mimic destruction, this ride gave people a physical taste of catastrophe, but injuries from falling debris and shaken necks led to lawsuits and insurance problems. By the 1930s, earthquake rides vanished from most parks. Still, they hinted at amusement's darker side, our strange urge to relive horror from a place of safety, or at least the illusion of it. But beyond simulated disasters, some attractions offered real danger, with water, depth, and no way out. At several seaside parks, the diving bell was sold as an educational experience, but it was terrifying. Guests entered a small, airtight steel chamber, suspended by a crane. It was lowered into the ocean, lake, or a deep tank. As water pressure increased and the bell sank, the air grew thick, and light disappeared. Some bells had windows, but many didn't, leaving riders in near-total darkness with creaks, groans, and the bubbling rush of water as their only soundtrack. If something malfunctioned, like the winch or air supply, passengers had no way to escape. One infamous incident at a New Jersey park left riders stuck underwater for over an hour. Claustrophobic, pitch black and often damp inside, the experience terrified many, but it was wildly popular, especially with those seeking real danger. Eventually, safety standards improved, and most diving bells were retired or replaced by dry submarine tours. But for those who remember the original, it was less a ride and more a near-death memory. It didn't spin, you did. The haunted swing illusion, first introduced in 1894, convinced riders they were being turned upside down, when in fact the room rotated around them. Guests sat on a stationary swing that gently rocked, while the entire room, floor, ceiling, and walls, was built on a rotating barrel. The visual trick was so disorienting that people screamed, vomited, or collapsed after stepping off. In some versions, fake ghosts or lights appeared mid-spin, pushing the experience from disorienting to terrifying. The illusion messed with balance, vision, and even heart rate. Some guests panicked, believing they were truly spinning upside down or about to fall. At the time, understanding of motion sickness and disorientation was limited, so the ride just kept going. Today, versions of the haunted swing live on in museums and funhouses, but early models, with minimal safety and poor ventilation, were psychological torture chambers dressed as innocent fun. Which of these early thrill machines would you ride or avoid at all costs? Let us know in the comments. With a name like Whirl of Death, you'd expect something intense, and you'd be right. This ride combined a vertical loop and a swinging gondola in a chaotic, nausea-inducing spectacle. Riders sat in a giant cage that not only spun in circles, but also rotated on its own axis, like a hamster wheel gone berserk. There were no seatbelts, only steel bars to hold. Many passed out, some vomited mid-air, and more than a few staggered away, unable to walk straight. One London park famously shut it down after a woman suffered a concussion mid-loop. Despite this, the ride was a crowd magnet. People didn't want smooth, they wanted terrifying. The more unnatural the motion, the more popular it became. But with rising injury rates and growing public concern, the Whirl of Death quietly disappeared from parks by the 1930s. Today's thrill rides owe a debt to it, but none dare carry that same name, probably for good reason. Don't let the silly name fool you. The Tickler was pure chaos. Built into a giant wooden spiral, it was essentially a gravity-powered pinball machine for humans. Riders sat in circular carts released at the top of a winding, tilted track. As they spun downward, the carts bounced violently off wooden bumpers, careened unpredictably, and slammed into each other with bone-rattling force. There was no steering, no control, just the physics of momentum and pain. The ride's tickling came from the sheer absurdity and physicality of being knocked around with no warning. Some loved the dizziness, others walked away bruised, banged up, or bleeding from rough collisions. Still, the Tickler thrived for over a decade in US and European parks before being phased out due to mounting injuries and noise complaints. It was an early glimpse into how far people would go for a laugh and a lurch, proof that terror doesn't always need speed. Sometimes it just needs gravity and wood. Step inside a giant barrel, stand against the wall, now spin it so fast that the floor drops away, and you stick to the sides like a fly. Welcome to the Rotor, an invention of German engineer Ernst Hofmeister that soon became a carnival favorite worldwide. The centrifugal force pinned guests to the wall as the floor slid out from beneath them, leaving them hanging sideways, screaming and laughing in a blur of motion. What made it terrifying wasn't just the sensation, but the unpredictability. Some guests fainted, others vomited while suspended. Operators kept the barrel spinning based on their mood, and early models had minimal ventilation or padding. Bruises were common. In rare cases, guests were injured trying to sit up mid-spin. Eventually, the Rotor got safer, or disappeared, but its sheer weirdness lives on in nostalgic memories. It was a human centrifuge, equal parts science experiment and public spectacle. But one final round of fear remains, attractions that preyed on your mind, not just your body. At first glance, she was harmless, a mechanical woman in a glass box, endlessly rocking and cackling. But for many parkgoers, the laughing lady became a childhood trauma. Her high-pitched, maniacal laugh played on a loop, echoing across boardwalks and fairgrounds, day and night. Her body jerked unnaturally with each laugh, her mouth frozen open in a toothy grin. Children often burst into tears at the sight, and even adults reported getting chills. Some versions had red glowing eyes, making her feel more like a demonic presence than a cheerful mascot. Supposedly, her laugh was recorded from an actual performer, but no one could agree who. Over time, the attraction became infamous. Urban legends grew. Was she haunted? Did her laugh ever stop? Eventually, changing tastes and noise complaints led to her quiet retirement. But anyone who ever walked past her remembers it. That laugh, That grin, that feeling of being watched. The laughing lady didn't move, but she stuck with you. Long before horror movies filled cinemas, amusement parks introduced something even more disturbing: the Chamber of Horrors. These dark exhibits featured wax figures of executed criminals, torture victims, and infamous murder scenes. Guillotines, electric chairs, and gallows were recreated in unsettling detail. Some displays included mechanical elements, heads that rolled, eyes that opened suddenly, or bodies that twitched. Guests moved from scene to scene in silence, absorbing the grotesque tableau. Children were admitted freely, no age limits. It was both history lesson and spectacle, marketed as educational but crafted to disturb. Over time, protests from parents and religious groups pushed many of these attractions to close or tone down. Still, the Chamber of Horrors set a precedent: fear as entertainment. Today's haunted houses and horror films walk in its shadow, but those early wax halls were colder, quieter, and somehow more real. The screams weren't loud, they were silent, and that made them linger. Which of these final fear-filled attractions gave you chills? Or would you risk them all for the thrill? Let us know in the comments. We're dying to know. I hope you enjoyed this eerie journey through the forgotten horrors of early amusement parks. Would you dare ride them all? Share your chills and keep the thrills alive. Until next time.